Where am I going? You're too cheap to charge it at home.
It's de minimis, okay? Running my whole house off the city center.
We're good to go? All right, folks, good morning. Welcome to Glendale City Council Special Budget Workshop of April 16, 2024. Meeting is called to order. Roll call is not necessary. Everybody is here. If you would take note of that, please. The next item on the agenda is our Pledge of Allegiance. Everyone, please stand, join with me in the pledge. If you're wearing a hat, if it's appropriate, if you'd remove it, I'd appreciate it. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, liberty and justice. Thank you. And with that, Ms. Bauer, would you go ahead and roll into item number 1?
Fiscal year 2024-25 budget workshop.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the council. Pleased to see you again this morning as we continue our budget development for FY 24-25. We're going to turn this over to Glendale Budget Administrator Jonathan Hill to lead us through the presentation.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. First, I'd like to review the budget calendar. Today is our 5th budget workshop for fiscal year 25. At the May 14th voting meeting, we'll have the tentative budget adoption. At the June 11th voting meeting, we'll have the final budget adoption and property tax levy. And then at the June 25th voting meeting, we'll have the property tax adoption. Here is our agenda for today. We'll have follow-up items from previous budget workshops, changes to the budget, fiscal year 24 to 25 operating budget, fiscal year 24-25 capital improvement plan, fiscal year 24 to 25 general funds transfer budget, and then the fiscal year 24 to 25 total budget. So now we'll begin the follow-up items from our capital improvement plan since we last met in March. This slide shows the follow-up, the improvements that have been done to Foothills Recreation Aquatic Centers. The following are upgrades and improvements that have been completed at FRAC since fiscal year 21. These items are either in the design or permitting phase of the construction at FRAC. Most of the items in this slide are included as part of the performance-based contract CIP project FC 24051, which is page 25 of the updated binder, and it has 11.9 million budgeted in fiscal year 25. A council member mentioned if the Scallop Streets program was still active, and it is. It's on page 64 in the updated binder, and there's $7.8 million budgeted for fiscal year 25. Here are the changes to the CIP since March 5th workshop. So this slide relates to the updated binder that I can go over real quick. That was put on the desk this morning. The first page of the binder is a table of contents. The second page are the changes that are on the next two slides of the CIP since March 5th. Then we have the first tab is by project type. This is all the total per project type, for example, airport arts for the 10-year CIP. Then we have the funding sources for the next 10 years. And then the following tabs are by project type. And for those ones, we have the updated change documents as requested. The departments provided more information. And then we also highlighted any projects that are needing voter authorization. Those are highlighted in orange. And then followed by the change document are the summary by project for each of those project types. And then I believe summary by fund. And so back to the slide number 8. Carryover, that increased by $69.2 million. Budget and Finance worked with the department to calculate the amount of carryover funded needed for fiscal year 24 projects. The amount presented in a workshop on March 25th has increased by $69.2 million. These funds are projects that will not be completed before the end of the fiscal year. Appropriation needs to be carried over into fiscal year 25. so the projects can be completed next year. The carryover will be reconciled once fiscal year 24 has closed. We have building maintenance reserve. Oh, sorry, let me go back to CIP AP 25005 runway overlay. That project was removed because it is to be completed by ADOT. Then we have building maintenance reserve carryover funding is in 24-20 or FY 25 of 1.8, but new funding for fiscal year 25 through 34 has been removed. The ongoing funding has been added to facilities operating budget. Oops, went too fast. Then we have the system of care improvements. We moved funding from fiscal year 24, or from 25 through 24. This was approved by council consensus back in June of 2023.
Mayor,
Oops.
Go ahead.
I have a question, thank you. Just for clarification on the previous item, you were speaking of the 10-year building maintenance reserve that had 18 million set to it. At 1.8 million a year, did we just take that 1.8 million each, well, for this year, and the plan, I guess, is going forward, and it has been operated to, that 1.8 million has been put in the facilities operating budget?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Turner, that project will have carryover from fiscal year 24 that will appear in fiscal year 25. I'm not sure what that exact number is off the top of my head, but I can get that to you. The ongoing funding was 1.8 million a year. That funding was removed. Part of that funding has been put into their operating budget. There are also additional projects within the general fund capital improvement plan that facilities has for HVAC, plumbing, roofs, things of that nature. Typically, those were the things that were being charged to building maintenance reserve. So they have projects in the CIP that can cover those programs, but they also now have more money in their operating budget to cover the other things that building maintenance reserve was paying for.
Thank you. Seeing as we only fund the operating budget on an annual basis, and there's going to be a carryover, do we suspect that the carryover plus whatever's been added to this year's operating budget for facility maintenance out of this 1.8 is going to come close to 1.8, like 1.6 or 7, or what do we think?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Turner, that's correct, yes.
Okay. And then it will be up to, I suppose that the plan, at least, is that in future budget proposals, that money will remain in facility maintenance's base budget, and unless council takes it out or unless management does and lets us know, because there was an intention behind establishing the maintenance reserve, and that was so that we didn't lose maintenance when we had down cycles.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Turner, the building maintenance reserve wasn't being used exactly in the way that you would think. It wasn't set aside now as like, oh, we're going to put this in reserve and it's going to kind of accumulate there. What was happening is it was being used for these various programs, as Mr. Hill and Ms. Lindsay mentioned. So elevators, roofs, painting, different types of things, they were being charged and to the building maintenance reserve. So what has happened now instead is you'll see in the CIP those various programs, elevator renewal, roof renewal, painting, it's being broken out so it's a little more transparent as to what those funds are being used for. And in addition to that, there's been ongoing operating revenue added to their operating budget, but you can also now see them specifically laid out in the capital plan as to what they are. Well, are they elevators? Are they flooring? Are they, et cetera, et cetera. If in the sense of a reserve, we still have a general fund reserve and a general fund contingency. If it's a true emergency, something happened to one of our facilities or buildings and we needed an emergency repair of the type you would typically think a building reserve would be used for, we'll go to general funds contingency and general funds reserve. So it's more intentionally put as to the way it has been being used in the past several years, and I think it's a little bit more transparent the way that it is now.
And Mayor and Vicki, correct me if I'm wrong, but transfers out of the general fund reserve, the contingency have to be council approved, is that correct?
Mayor, members of the council, yes, that's correct. You have to approve any contingency transfers.
Thank you.
Okay, the next slide, some additional changes to the CIP. We combined 3 street projects into one, CIP ST 2406068. In doing so, reduced it by 3.4 million. We removed Camelback Road 99 to Loop 101. That will be part of a future freeway interchange project, so that reduced it by 414,000. And then we added some DIF funding of 2.6 million to CIP ST 21052 83rd Avenue Glendale to Northern Street project. And the last one, there was a net effect. There was two parks project called Sierra Verde Park Improvements. We just combined them into one project, and so that was a net zero.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
Mayor, I think I have a question about the Sierra Verde. So there was, I think 1.8 million, somewhere around that amount of money. There was, I believe, ARPA money that was in the original CIP. I can find it, but I'm kind of overwhelmed with space here. And I had asked that we would consider a pickleball court instead at the park rather than the splash pad, especially considering the amount of space that was used up for the well site. I didn't want to take down more open space in the park without considering maybe something that might get used and replace the sand volleyball courts with the pickleball courts. Is that what this is? Is that the splash pad has been discontinued and now we're going to consider either the pickleball court or something else for that park?
Mayor, council members, Councilmember Tomachoff, we are in the middle of studying potentially what a pickleball court would look like, how that process might work, and if it would fit within that park. So, yeah, the funding here is to look at that, look at potential LED lighting, and also continue to look at the irrigation part of that as well. So we're studying all of that and should have some recommendations coming soon.
Oh, okay, but my point, I guess what I'm asking is the splash pad has been removed, and that's an added amenity to the park, and then taking that money and turning that into irrigation and something that doesn't necessarily add an amenity, I'm not really in favor of that, because this was to add an amenity, a feature to the park for the residents to enjoy, and these other things are really just kind of ongoing maintenance that we're doing in all of the parks. So I just want to make sure I understand what direction park staff is going and what I'm thinking, what my desire is, and I think the residents' desire, because they weren't excited about the splash pad because of the space that it would have taken up, considering there's a sand volleyball court there that nobody uses, and now the well site takes up the entire corner of that park. But they don't want to give up an added amenity. So either, replacing, upgrading equipment, that kind of thing is at least the direction I hope this is moving, and not just for irrigation and park lighting. So I wanted to make that clear, that which direction is this going, or is that still yet to be determined?
Mayor, council members, Councilmember Tomachoff, yes, we are looking at the study of what a pickleball court and the feasibility of that would be. So what we are working on, bringing back a recommendation of how we could spend that money with amenities and what feasibility of what might be able to be added there.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. So, because it's my understanding that irrigation and park lighting is an ongoing effort citywide in all parks, and that's not what this money was to be used for. Thank you.
Next up, we have the operating budget follow-up items. I'll hand over to Ms. Lindsay for those.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I'll be covering the operating budget follow-up items. The first slide, there was a question about increases to the general fund for personnel-related items. The general fund personnel services has increased by $29.9 million. 18.7 million of that is salaries, 2.7 million of that is benefits, and 8.6 is retirement. The next slide, since we kind of talked about what we had added personnel-wise for general fund, we also added a slide for what the overall increase to personnel services for all funds. So this includes the general fund. The total increase to personnel has gone up by 42.2 million. 27.9 of that is salaries, 9.8 of that is retirement, and 4.5 million of that is benefits.
Mayor? Thank you, Mayor. I have a question. So, I know that there's salaries, then there's salaries, and that includes, COLA and merit, right? I mean, that's combined, all salaries. I'm sorry, I know this is too far, but I don't really have room for it. What about where is that carried? There's that other award that is, I don't even remember what it's called, but there's monetary awards for personnel. Is that carried someplace else, or is that part of this, or where is that carried, and how much is that we allocate for rewarding employees?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Tomchoff, I think you're referring to the Success Factor Awards. Those are budgeted in the Human Resources Department.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor,
Go ahead.
so are we still on track to add somewhere in the neighborhood of 48 or 50 employees?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Turner, yes, that's correct. I believe the total number is 48.
Good, because that's what I believe too. Thank you.
The next slide was, there was a question about the differences or the additions, what was non-contractual versus regulatory or contractual as far as the total budget increase was concerned. The total proposed budget increase is $76.2 million. Non-contractual items make up 51% of that amount, so $39.2 million. And regulatory or contractual items make up about $37 million, which is about 49% of those items. Some of those examples of those are regulatory or contractual items include benefits, risk, and workers' compensation insurance increases, contractual increases like landscaping, custodial, raw water, chemicals, and contract labor, utility increases like water, electricity, or natural gas, and increases associated with the proposed memorandums of understanding, or the MOUs. Non-contractual increases include new or replacement equipment, including vehicles, technology, and safety equipment. All personnel increases, including COLA and merit increases, and the implementation of the classification and compensation study, and then new FTEs. This is a follow-up item regarding the expanded heat relief respite centers. The current operating costs are $108,500 per location. Sorry about that. We currently have 2 locations. Those are grant funded. The question was what it would cost for the city to fund a third center. So the second column is the estimated city cost for a third center. They've estimated between $130,000 and $200,000. That's broken down by operations, what it would cost for cooling, and what a lease would cost, and then whether we can find a location to actually do that type of work.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Do you have any stats on how many people are served by a cooling respite center? How many people have used it?
I may have to ask Ms. Moreno to come up and answer that question.
Good morning, Mayor and Councilmember Clark. About 12,000 visits occurred during the inaugural year last year. Last year was the first year that we ran them. We had 3 centers.
So about 6,000 per center, because we've got 2.
On average, last year, over 3 centers, it was 12,000, so about 4,000. Some centers were busier than others. We expect that we would achieve, with 3 centers, we expect we would achieve a similar number of visits this year. So if we reduce to 2 centers, we would see a reduction of that 12,000 number.
Where are the locations of these centers?
So the 2 centers that are confirmed for this year are Glendale Mission Church, which is approximately 59th Avenue and Rose Lane, and then St. John's Church, which is 51st Avenue, just south of Glendale.
Okay, so both of them are in basically the downtown or South Glendale, right?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Another follow-up item was a question about the general fund transfers. So this slide covers the transfers in and transfers out of the general fund. The transfers in to the general fund are from the public safety sales tax fund from both police and fire. Those total $50.4 million. And the transfers out include the vehicle replacement fund, airport special revenue fund, the CAP grant, public housing, the grip stick transfer, the maintenance of effort transfers, general fund capital projects, and debt service for both the COPS and the MPC and excise tax.
Mayor? Oh.
What are maintenance of effort transfers? I've never heard that before in my
NHL
life.
money.
Hmm?
NHL, isn't it? Yeah.
Mayor, members of the council, those are the general fund loan transfers back to the enterprise funds.
I was making sure she was finished. Are you finished? You finished?
Pardon?
Are you finished?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. So the $2.2 million is being transferred back to repay the $25 million transferred in, I think, 2011, 2012 to the NHL.
Yeah, Mayor, members of the council, that's correct.
Okay. How much should we do? Does anybody know off the top of their head how much should we? Is that an annual amount that we send, or how much did we send last year, or repay?
Mayor, members of the council, it's an annual amount that we pay back. There's a schedule that we have. The amount fluctuates annually. I can get the amount that we paid back last year. I don't have that in front of me. The transfer this year includes about $850,000 to water, 1.2 million to landfill, and about 206,000 to the solid waste fund.
Okay, and I know that we're repaying interest back to those funds too as well, right? I think I had asked that.
Mayor,
before.
members of the council, yes, the reason why, as Ms. Lindsay said, the reason why the number fluctuates slightly is because we update the amount of the interest every year to the amount of interest that we earned on our investments, or the city earned on its investments the prior year.
Okay.
So they're earning the same interest they would have if they had those funds invested themselves.
Okay, for myself anyway, I'd like to see the amount being applied and what the remaining balance is of those three funds. That just can be an email to me. I don't know if anybody else is interested in knowing where we are with taking care of that obligation, but I'd like to know. Thank you.
Oh, hold on. You were done, right?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm done.
Thank you, Mayor. For the sake of reminding us and also for the audience, could you briefly explain the debt service for the COPs, which you phrased as COPS, and the debt service for the MPC excise tax?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Yeah.
Councilman?
Could you briefly explain the debt service for the COPs, what that is and why we do it, and also for the MPC excise tax?
Mayor, council members, Councilmember Turner, the debt service for the certificates of participation, or COPS, is the debt service. About 3 years ago, we issued some COPS to pay down our unfunded liability with the public safety personnel retirement system for both PD and fire. This is the debt service on that issuance so that we could pay down that unfunded liability. The MPC excise tax bonds were bonds that were issued previously to build city facilities at Camelback Ranch and the arena.
Camelback Ranch and what was it?
And the arena.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor, I do have another question on general fund capital projects, $93,660,924. Is that part of that, the 70,000 or 70,700,000 for the parking garage? And is this where we have that discussion?
Mayor, members of the council, yes, that is part of that transfer. We do still have that project in the CIP as a placeholder.
Okay. It's listed project CIPP L24055. It says parking garage investment. My first question is this an investment? That's how it's in the CIP, that it's an investment. I don't know who can answer that, but that's what it says here.
As we presented this to the council, if the garage were built as originally planned, there was a revenue stream associated with the parking with the development of the parking garage, and there clearly was an ROI based on the amount invested versus the amount expected to be received. So I don't know if that's why we called it the investment, but yeah, clearly different than if we did a park allocation for CIP. We weren't expecting revenues to come in greater than the cost of building the park. In the case of the garage in the black lot, the way the performer looked is there was a clear ROI, and so it was then phrased as an investment.
Okay, but the city, Mayor, if I could, the city's not looking at, because it doesn't meet any of the criteria of investment for public money. So, I just want to say that. And then you said the council gave a consensus, but what the council gave a consensus for, what we were presented was the parking garage and then an operating agreement on November 21st workshop. There is no operating agreement. So am I to assume that this is remaining in the CIP with no offset to the $70,700,000 investment? Because the operating agreement does not exist. We've never voted on that. It was presented at the workshop, and that's not, it's not in place. So I'm not sure exactly is this moving ahead? And I know I have been told that, we could just build the parking garage and operate it ourselves, but that's not how I recall the council consensus was provided. It was for all three items were presented, and there was a consensus. I wasn't in support of it, but still there was a consensus to move ahead with it. But at this point today, right now, there is no operating agreement. There's no offset to the $70,700,000 investment.
Mayor, members of council, Councilman Tomchoff, I think Assistant City Manager Rios has some comments as well. But again, this would be as I've shared with the council, there's a lot of things that are still in play with regards to this project. So this is primarily a placeholder, but we're not going to spend any money on a construction contract until we can answer all the questions for the council. So it's really a placeholder as we explore the options. I shared some of those options with the council recently. We're still pursuing those, and as I mentioned, we think we'll have some potential recommendations to bring back to the council to discuss here shortly.
Thank you.
Mayor, members of the council, just also to add to what Mr. Phelps said, we do have a revenue offset in the budget as far as the budget is concerned. And so they offset one another. It will depend on how council decides to move forward, whether, how that ends up working. But in terms of the budget, we do have a revenue offset budgeted.
Mayor, where is the revenue offset, or do you have that information? I mean, is that the scenario where the city would be building the parking garage and operating it ourselves? Because I know that concept, I just wanted to understand exactly where all of this is, because it's a lot of money to put in the CIP, but I don't know whether that's the intention, just to go ahead with this and then, figure out the rest later.
Yep. Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Tomchoff, well, I'll let Ms. Rios tell you where it's actually reflected in the budget, but what the offset was the anticipation of an operating agreement being entered into by the city and the developer to manage the parking garage and to essentially establish for that management fee, they would be paying a substantial amount of money back to the city. As I shared recently with the council, because of some changes that have happened with the approach to this project, I think it's safe to say at this point that it's not known clearly if we were going to still pursue that type of arrangement. As previously said, we are looking at options, and we plan to come back hopefully with multiple options for the council to review here shortly on that. But that's how it was originally set, there was a capital cost of roughly $71 million to construct the garage. We anticipated that at the time of issuing the certificate of occupancy, there would be a $58 million offset that would be given back to the city, and that's what is being referred to as reflected in our budget.
Okay.
Is the $58 million. Obviously, that hasn't happened, but we also have not spent the money on the $71 million for the garage.
Mayor, I just have a couple more questions if I could. So, right, and that's based on the operating agreement that was presented when the council gave consensus. So that's the part that confused me, because it said project increased per council consensus, but that was with the offset. So in the event that this is not able to be worked out, can this $70,700,000 be used for anything else? It's a placeholder right now, but in the event that this project does not move forward, what else could this money be used for, if anything?
Mayor, members of the council, again, the net usable amount, because if you don't build the garage, we won't have a $58 million offset. So really, it reflected the $13 million of construction costs the city was going to fund on a $70-some million garage.
Mayor, if I could, I didn't phrase that correctly. I'm saying, as it sits right now, you're saying there's a $70,700,000 placeholder in there because there is no offset today for this. But in the event that the garage doesn't get built for whatever reason, because there's a lot of unknown factors, as you said, can this $70 million that's a placeholder today, can this money, if the parking garage does not manifest, can this be used for any other uses citywide? And if so, what could it be used for?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Tomachoff, again, if we don't build the garage, so the 71 million, we will not receive a revenue or a cash payment of the 58. So it's what is available for the council to spend if we don't move forward with this project is really closer to $13 million that could be reallocated to other projects, because that's the net difference between what we were going to spend and what we would have received the day the garage opened up. So you take the 71 million, you subtract the payment for the operator to be able to share in the revenue, it was a net to the city of 13 million. That is what would be available today or in the future for the council to reprioritize if so desired.
Okay, Mayor, one more question. So what you're saying is there would be no intention to move ahead with spending $70 million on the parking garage without the offset?
Mayor, members of the council, yeah, and again, just a reminder, we don't have authorization to start constructing, so we would, if indeed there was a project, we would bring that there, we would explain how it was going to be financed. It would not be my intention to bring a garage project at this time for the full 71 million without some type of an offset, because we don't have the resources identified to be able just to fund a garage for 71 million. It would take some major rework of our budget.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. And as long as we're conveniently on this subject, I just want to make it clear for the record and everyone that my consensus to moving forward on this garage, both in a workshop and then the subsequent vote later that night, was based on the plan and the strategy that was presented to us at that time. And that doesn't mean that I wouldn't find other strategies acceptable. It just means I haven't. They haven't been presented, they haven't been analyzed. So one should not construe necessarily that I would be supportive of any other strategy or all other strategies. It was based on the strategy that was presented and the promise that the operating agreement was trailing just shortly behind the agreement that we approved that evening. So just for clarity.
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Turner, staff fully understands that what we presented to the council was one approach, and there seemed to be general consensus to continue to explore that. We recognize that if the project change, the design, the structure of the deal changes, it will be really compelled upon staff to present that information to the council and get your concurrence. We don't see one having given automatic acceptance of a different model. It'll have to stand on its own merits. And so I appreciate the comment, but we do recognize that.
Thank you.
The next slide are the changes to the operating budget since council last saw it back on April 4th. Through working with Human Resources and Public Safety and further analyzing both the MOUs and the classification compensation study, there's an additional $1.5 million in increases to employee salaries. Departments who received one-time supplementals in fiscal year 24 and will not receive that equipment before the end of the current fiscal year have requested to have that appropriation carried over for fiscal year 24. These items are currently on order but will not be received before June 30th. We have added $10,000 for the Dolly Parton Imagination Library in the library operating budget. Human Resources requested the annual ongoing maintenance for their pay scale software as one of their operating budget supplementals, but we have determined that the full amount of the first year of that project is budgeted in the IT division, and so we've removed the amount of that supplemental from HR's budget. And then vehicle allowances for staff affected by the DCRP project have also been added to the budget. These adds include employees in communications, in intergovernmental programs, and organizational performance.
Mayor? Thank you, Mayor. We also discussed the Sister Cities project, and I just didn't see that here. Is it somewhere else in the budget? Was it absorbed somewhere else?
Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Turner, thank you for Malnar, sorry. Thank you for reminding me of that. We did add $10,000 for the Sister Cities project. It's being absorbed in the non-departmental budget.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question that there were two changes, and I'm certain there was a consensus for in fiscal year 2025. There's zero money in here for Western Area Fire Station. There was clearly a consensus to fund design, planning, all that of the Western area, and spend some money on figuring out where that was going to go and begin planning that. And I thought that there was a consensus also to move, we discussed this when we had the CIP meeting, the money for the $15 million for the police crime lab was last year in the fiscal year 2025. This year it was bumped back to fiscal year 2026, which I didn't have a problem with, except that I believe where there was a consensus, I could go back and look at the minutes, that to move not all the whole 15 million, but enough money in there to begin design and review, so that in fiscal year 2026, when there's a large sum amount of money available, that we could actually break ground. Those two conversations, I believe, Councilmember Clark probably remembers, that there was a consensus to not to move whatever, $1 million, 500,000, I don't know how much was needed to begin planning and designing both of those facilities.
Mayor.
And I don't see those listed here.
Mayor, thank you. I saw in the budget, and I assumed that this was the solution for now for the western area, that there'll be a new fire station at somewhere in the area of 75th Avenue in Orangewood. Is that correct? Can anyone confirm?
Mayor, members of the council, and I've got Chief Freeberg here. If you recall, we're in the middle of a study right now that's being, in its draft form, is being presented to senior leadership that talks about location, and so we felt it was a little bit premature to lock in at today, but that is going to be happening. Maybe Assistant St. John,
Well,
Deputy Manager.
Mayor, we do have a specific line item in the budget that says 75th and Orangewood. So now I'm really confused.
Mayor, Councilmember Clark, it's a placeholder. We've seen some initial data from the consultant that suggests the polygon for that area of 75th and Orangewood, we'd see a greater need for resources in that area than, say, 59th and Cactus, which is one of the ideas that we had thought about if we were to consider moving Station 54 off the border of Phoenix. What the consultant has initially said is if you're going to move that station, you get a better bang for your buck, so to speak, if you move it closer to the 75th and Orangewood than, say, the 59th and Cactus. So we just put something in as a placeholder in the out years in the event that council would make the decision to go that direction.
Mayor, thank you. So does this obviate the need to still consider a fire station in the Westgate area? And did the consultant look at the Westgate area as opposed to the 75th Orangewood area? And was it the consultant that determined the need was greater for the latter rather than moving or considering Westgate at this time?
Mayor, Councilmember Clark, I've not seen the complete report from the consultant, but I understand that the airport area, Westgate area, is the priority, which is why we intend to put that in the first 5 years rather than the out years, because
Okay.
it is the priority.
All right. So one last follow-up. Are we moving forward with 75th and Orangewood as well?
Mayor, Councilmember Clark, not at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So I was asking about the Western Area Fire Station, and I know the specific location. There's discussion about the airport possibly. There's discussion about the 99th Avenue Park and Ride. There's some options, but certainly it's not going to take all of fiscal year 2025 for the consultant and the data to be able to identify what the best location is for that fire station. And the conversation, as I recall it, was that we put enough money in there to begin. And I know that we were told that we've got basically a footprint, a design for fire stations that can be duplicated, but you still have to study where you're going to put it and how it's going to fit. And there's still money that has to be spent to be ready to put a shovel in the ground. So that was what the conversation was, is that why don't there's no money in the Western Area Fire Station until fiscal year 2028. Why wouldn't we at least put a placeholder, if that's what you want to call it, in there because there's zero money in there right now for the Western Area Fire Station. And I don't know, I'm sure there's people here that would be able to tell us how much money would we need to be able to do initial design work and figure out, once we identify the location, that we have figured out that it's going to work on that site and how it's going to work on that site. And if the council desires in fiscal year 2026 to bump that money forward and start building that fire station, then all of that other work is done. And the exact same conversation, I was surprised because the crime lab was, on the ballot essentially in November, and those bonds were approved, and then the crime lab was bumped back. And I was told the reason was because there's so many other citywide projects happening, and I understand that our engineers and our staff is busy with other projects, but the design and everything for the crime lab could be, and I believe there was a consensus to put that money in fiscal year 2025, because right now it's zero, and that we could begin work on that site, and that when there's 15 million available in fiscal year 2026, we could actually break ground and start building the crime lab. So those were the conversations that were had when we had the CIP presentation, but there's zero money in fiscal year 2025 for either of those projects, and they're not listed here as a change. So I guess, is there still a consensus to put $500,000 or whatever the amount of money is in here so that work can begin? That's all done by, we hire somebody to do this. It doesn't take staff time. It just needs money to have people start analyzing these sites and looking at these sites and figuring out how it's gonna, because there were some options also with the crime lab. So that's my question, is I would like to see the money that we had discussed put in there so that part of the work can begin.
So Mayor, members of the council, again, it's kind of, some of this is timing. The consultant report is really looking at the system of how we deliver these, and I think you can't do it in a vacuum. And so, as said, we have some placeholders that are there. There's really several components. My question will be back for staff of what would it take to move some money into the CIP, which I assume we can do. There's more to it than just identifying a location and a cost of the capital cost. There's also a very critical component to how do we then build that into our long-range forecast, to how do we staff it. A station can run 10 to 13 million a year in additional staffing resources and equipment. We just got to make sure now, as we look at the system of how we deliver services, what's the impact on long range for sustainability and building to the budget. The consultant is trying to give us some recommendations for ways that we can better balance the workload, and I will be bringing those options to the council. I don't know, Rick, what's the plan? Do we have a schedule for this fall to bring the consultant report back with recommendations?
Mr. City Manager, we have a meeting within the next couple of days to begin initial reviews with the consultant on his findings.
We have one today internally, but I think to be able to bring it back to the council would probably be, I think we're anticipating shortly after the break of coming back to the council and start sharing that information and start looking then what's the best process for establishing and meeting these needs.
Okay, Mayor, I'm a little, first, okay, but that consultant is not analyzing the crime lab, and certainly that analysis took place about what the cost was gonna be before it was put on the ballot
Yeah,
in November,
I
so,
was referring to fire, I'm sorry.
okay, what about the crime lab? I mean, we don't have a problem having a $70 million placeholder in here for a parking garage, and if we end up not being ready to proceed with that, then I guess we end up not being ready to proceed with that, but I'm a little baffled why we can't put a placeholder in here to begin the design and analysis of the site of how that crime lab is going to fit in with the evidence storage lab, where there was several different options presented to us of what was going to work best. But certainly those conversations took place about the cost and operating and ongoing expense of having our own crime lab before it was put on the ballot. So I don't understand why we wouldn't be ready to put some money in fiscal year 2025, which there was this $15 million in fiscal year 2025 in last year's CIP. So I'm just asking for, whatever the amount of money is, $500,000 to be put in there to start working on getting this done.
Mayor, members of the council, we can certainly go back and look at that. That's not a problem. We'll work with Mr. St. John on, we don't know what number that is. I don't know if that number is 500,000 or what number it is, but we'll work with the city manager and a deputy city manager, St. John, and propose something, and it'll come back at tentative.
Mayor?
Hold on. Are you done?
Will we have that answer because this is our last budget meeting, so.
Mayor, members
How
of
will
the
that be managed?
council, certainly. We'll let you know what the number is when we come up with it with Mr. St. John, and then we'll get back to you on that, and then you'll see it at, before tentative adoption.
Thank you.
Hold on. Are you the one trying to get my attention?
Yeah,
You
I
were,
wanted
okay.
to speak. I don't know if you did.
I don't know who you're talking to, Mayor. We all have names. Would you bother using them?
Mr. Turner, I'm addressing you. Would you like to speak?
Yes, I would.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Hold on.
Yeah, my memory of our conversation about the crime lab fits in with what Councilmember Tomachoff just said. We wanted to have money available in the upcoming fiscal year to do planning, design, and all of that, so that when we were ready to actually, I was going to use the word pull the trigger, but that probably doesn't fit well here. When we were ready to begin the crime lab and actually break ground and get moving on it, that we would have done that. We'd have all that preliminary work done. Not that we would wait until 26 to even begin design and all of that, which means we wouldn't begin construction probably till 27 and all of that. To me, and I think it was my sense of the council, that crime lab is an important piece of progress that we need in our community to help us, solve and prevent future crimes in our community, and maybe for other communities nearby as well. So that, I wanted to say that her description aligned with my memory. I was going to segue into another topic, so I'll go ahead and do that, and then if other council members want to double back. But we've talked about the money for sister cities, the money for the Dolly Parton project that we've added, but I had also asked for adding some money into the special events budget that could be used to help, what did I write here, to assist when we have outside promoters that want to come in and do projects, do events in our community. I'd asked, I'd suggested an amount, but had left it for staff to come back to us and tell us what they thought a proper amount might be, so that we could help with outside promoters on things such as barricades or porta-johns or things like that, some of which are internally owned by the city, some are on site or nearby anyway. And then we did all receive the budget and attendance memo from our economic development director for those events that we've been funding, and it's certainly clear, at least with the Live at the Lot events, that it's when we bring in outside promoters, our attendance goes up significantly. And so what we can do on the little things to help make it easier for those outside promoters was that money I was looking for, but unless it's coming up in the next few minutes, I don't see it. Haven't heard about it, so where are we at on that?
Mayor, members of the council, because we didn't have a specific dollar amount for that particular item, we went back and looked at what we had budgeted in non-departmental along with the sister cities, and we determined that would also be something that would be able to be absorbed in non-departmental.
Okay, but it is departmental. I mean, the Sister Cities support is, you know, across all departments. We don't have a Sister Cities. If we had a Sister Cities department, then it should be in that budget, but this is something that belongs in special events, which is in Econ Dev.
Mayor, Councilmember Turner, apologies. When you had asked the question, I think we asked if we could be thoughtful about kind of that approach as well. And when we provided that information to the city council about this last year of operating for special events, one of the things that we've actually committed as a team is to go be even more thoughtful about how we move forward using the allocated funds that we have. And currently as a team, we do believe we have that opportunity to be able to couple with events with the budget that we currently have and to try to operate that way for a year without creating an additional fund at this point in time. What I will acknowledge is that if an event came forward that was larger, that did need some form of funding, we do have that opportunity should that come, that we would do some type of contracted event that could be paid out of non-departmental. But we believe as a department, we can operate even more efficiently and be able to couple with events such as the event you're referencing that happened in February. That was an event that while we used city expenses to hold an event the city was doing, also had the opportunity to partner with the event and find ways to facilitate those.
Okay, Mayor, if I can, Ms. Peterson's, so if a reputable outside promoter with a track history of success and whatever comes to do and wants to do outside of or an event, a special event within our city that aligns with our core missions and all of that, then you're going to be able to say yes at this point instead of saying no at this point.
Mayor, Councilmember Turner, well, there's a lot of factors that are involved in putting on an event. I think our goal as Economic Development and then the Special Events Division is to be able to facilitate those events through the things that we are capable of, whether it's already coupling with an event that the city is planning, being able to provide access to the lot, for instance, that we are using or other resources. That is something that hasn't taken place in the past, and we do believe we could do that. If there's a large ask of the city, from a funding standpoint, that more is in the realm of, say, sponsorships. As you saw in the memo that I provided, there's some of those events that are sponsored. There is still feasibility within our budget to contemplate those, and generally speaking, those would have to come before council in order to approve them at that dollar amount.
Mayor, Ms. Peterson, so I wouldn't consider a $3,000 ask or a $5,000 ask or something like that to where the city is picking up the cost of something probably that we can more easily and more cheaply do than the outside promoter could, such as barricades or porta-johns or those sorts of things. I wouldn't consider that a large ask, and it disappoints me when I hear that outside promoters want to come to our city and do these kinds of things, but economic development in a city with $1 billion budget
Questions for her.
says no for financial reasons, that, oh, well, we don't really have the money in our budget to do porta-johns or to do other things. So that's that's the problem I'm trying to solve. And if you tell me I've solved it, that's great. But if you need $10,000 or $20,000, in the upcoming year and more or less after that, then I think we should discuss it and have the ability to put that money available so we can do more successful events in our community that benefit our residents and benefit our local businesses.
Mayor, Councilmember Turner, that's also our goal, and that's been the charge of economic development and special events. What I will acknowledge that we've learned over the last year is that generally speaking, those event promoters that aren't capable or don't have the financial means to bring in porta potties, with all due respect, probably aren't capable of putting on the type of event that would be a quality event. What we're looking to do is bring in event promoters that can do an event that meets the standard of our community and is good for our community, and we have been coupling with those. And those have already been successful for us, and we're going to continue to do that, utilizing the resources that we have to support those events.
So, Mayor, if I might, so this food truck event that we just recently had that brought in 35 times more attendees than some of the events the city itself has been doing alone, did they not use the porta-johns that were there? Did they not use the barricade, the security, and other things that were already there? So that event benefited by that, but we used them anyway. We didn't come back and back charge them for that, did we? And that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. We're already incurring these expenses, not and I'm not saying only on the lot, but elsewhere, that we should be able to make available and not use money as a reason not to. Now, if we have a better reason, like they don't have a track record, or they don't have, a clear plan, or there's, it's not an event we want to be involved with, then we need to say that's the reason. We should not be using finances as the reason if we don't use it across the board. And in the city of $1 billion, I don't think that 10 or 20,000 is going to hurt us.
Mayor, Councilmember Turner, I think we're actually on the same page. Yes, that was what we're trying to do, is facilitate when we're using resources already. How do we work with event promoters to make those events even more successful and get the best out of the resources that we are providing as a city for events?
Well, just in case anybody's confused, I'm not hearing the answer I want to hear. I would like us to put some money in a pot that they have access to for those kind of events. And I'll propose 20,000. And if they don't, not saying they have to use it, but that's not a reason for turning down an otherwise reputable and meritorious event.
Mayor, I have something to say on this topic, if I could.
Mayor, I think I was first.
I do know. Are you finished?
I'll take a pause. I'm asking.
Okay. Well, because I got a bunch of people want to ask a bunch of questions, so I was
Well,
trying
then
to
put
figure
me at the back of that line again. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay.
All right,
So
thank.
Ray, hold on a minute. Lauren wants to catch Jesse while she's up there, then we'll come to you.
Yeah,
Well,
my
I
que-
was
my-
about her topic, and I was up there first. I'd like to speak first on her topic.
Fine.
Okay, so we discussed about the crime lab, and I recall, my recollection is the same as Councilmember Tomachoff's, that we were going to put into the budget for this fiscal year some sort of money set aside for looking at the project and developing a plan for it to move forward, so it'll be on the ground running when we have the money in 2025-26 fiscal year. So I agree that we should do that, and I would like to see that money allocated and put into the budget for this current year so that that is taken care of. And so we, and if we need to, and I thought we had consensus. And if that's the issue that we need to address now, whether or not we have consensus, I think we should address that now so that we can move forward on that topic and know that that's going to be in the budget. And then I have other, I wanted to discuss further Council Member Turner's topic, but I'll defer until we discuss this topic, and then we can go forward from there.
Councilmember Tomachoff was next.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. On that topic, I don't know if anybody, this memo from Ms. Peterson about the dollar amounts and the numbers of people that showed up to these events. And so the Live at the Lot series, I don't know if anybody did the math, but we're paying $52.56 per person.
I did, yes.
It's incredibly steep. The cost for Glendale Glitters kickoff weekend is $1.38 per person. The Folk and Heritage Festival is $6.66 per person, and the Chocolate Affair is $1.80 per person. There is, in my mind, something wrong with the amount of money we're spending on the lot. We're not getting good return on the investment. And so I think that, with all due respect to the economic development staff and the people planning these things, I think it would be well worth the investment to bring in outside promoters who know how to plan. I mean, I understand you're an economic development expert and the people on your staff but events and these kind of things are a completely different thing. And I'm not willing to spend any more money on a return of when it costs us $52.56 per person to get people to come into downtown. That is way too much money. So, I agree with Councilmember Turner whether we need to rethink how we're doing this, but obviously the promoter was incredibly successful in getting people here into downtown. This $52.56, this can't continue. This is way, we could have so many more events if you could get it down to even $10 a person or something. But I when I did that math, I was really stunned. There was one February, I think it was, 1 month that there was a really good turn, and that was where we used a promoter. This, no offense, but this just isn't good enough. $52.56 per person. Thank you.
But
It was
Vice Mayor?
Councilmember Turner, and then I know Councilmember. Weren't you in line to speak?
Thank you, Vice
Yes.
Mayor. I'll yield to Councilmember
Okay.
Clark.
Councilmember Clark.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to Councilmember Tomachoff's discussion about a placeholder for the crime lab. I too understand exactly what Councilmember Malnar and I think the rest of us understood. We do expect a placeholder in terms of moving the crime lab forward. It's fine, we're going to have the discussion about what we're going to do after the break, but I would like, as does Councilmember Tomachoff and Malnar, see some money in there as a placeholder for the crime lab while we have our discussion so that we know that we can move forward promptly on that issue. With regard to the events, I think seeing that that report from Ms. Peterson was an eye-opener. When I saw that we spent $250,000 for 4,300 people to attend live at the lot, I'm going, this is absolutely crazy. I don't want to see this particular series move forward. I think we need to have a robust discussion by council and see if there are alternative events or projects where that $250,000 can be programmed that will actually bring people downtown. This is not acceptable to see that kind of money spent for so few attendees. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Mr. Vice Mayor?
Yes.
Since we're on this subject, if I could, so just as a reminder, is that we had this discussion with the council. We recognize the cost of putting on the live events were different in this lot than what it would have been had we had our amphitheater, even in the old amphitheater. And the council, was, if you recall, was concerned that during the DCRP, that we needed to make extra effort to still try to do our best job to bring people in downtown during this 2-year window. And so we would be the first to recognize that the value proposition long term isn't sustainable. But our impression from conversations with this council was that we may need to spend a little bit more money, but it's really critical that we do what we can do under unique circumstances to bring people to downtown. So we did come up with the lot, the Live at the Lot program, knowing that we had to bring in porta potties, we had to bring in stages, and there's just a lot of things that had to come into that to make that work. So again, what I would say is that we'll continue to work on trying to find more efficient ways to spend the money. I would, personally concur with Councilmember Turner that I think a real opportunity exists with promoters to try to encourage more promoters. And then what we try to do then is fill in the gap. Because what we don't want to do is if there's only 4 shows that promoters want to do, that's not good for our downtown merchants. So we're trying to get consistency and people coming downtown on a regular basis. So we'll continue to work with that. And then maybe just as a thought, since we're kind of going into maybe a separate funding source, it might be thoughtful for us to get into the policy to make sure that, for example, that if we're going to help support a promoter coming in, that it's not a paid-for show, because we've had some paid-for shows to where the promoter is trying to turn, a profit on it, which is more than fine, but we probably want to come up with the policy to make sure that if we're contributing money to outside promoters, that the public benefit is that it's a free show that, they can come downtown and do it. So we'll continue the conversation, but I do want to remind the council, we knew that the lot was going to be a more expensive proposition for 2 years. Once we have the amphitheater completed, it's going to have sound and lights and all, most of the infrastructure. We believe we'll be able to drive those costs, that value proposition down substantially. Thank you.
Hold on, Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Mayor.
And then
I don't
you-
disagree with what the city manager has just said. I don't think we need to terminate the Live at the Lot series or downtown. I think it needs more fine tuning, and also maybe to be more quicker to react to things. But I think that those numbers were very disappointing to me, but also if you look in there, it does show that, as in February, you can get a good turnout, better than decent, but a good turnout. It is possible. And if, a dozen food trucks promoting their own business is what turned that around, which is, I believe, what it was. I don't think it was, don't take this as a criticism of staff. They work within their dynamic. It wasn't something staff did that was special. I think it was from the food truck side and maybe to some degree some roll off from other events downtown that particular Saturday. But that would be a level of success that, had it been across the board, I think we could have been happy with. It was even more than we typically would get at the amphitheater here over at City Hall. So I do think it's to our benefit to continue doing these programs, but it's clear we're having trouble promoting them. And when promoters come in and want to do an event, not necessarily even at the lot, not necessarily even downtown, but special events in our city where we can be helpful, but economic development special events doesn't have money in their budget to be helpful. That's what I'm saying. We need to have some money in their budget, not any different than what we've agreed to do to help us be able to get over the hill on bringing certain acts to our arena, where if the city sweetens the pot just a little bit, we'll get the act and all of our businesses get the benefit and all of our residents have it as well. And there was another one that we just recently added, that kind of, at the manager's suggestion, added that kind of a incentive or an expense fund too, so that we can participate and get over the hump on these things. And that's what I'm saying we need in special events is, and I'll say it, let's talk $20,000 so that it's there if a promoter that looks very good for us comes in, or even one we're willing to take a risk on comes in, and we can help do this, then we should. And should we have a policy? Yes. Does it perhaps start at the administrative level and get a recommendation up? I'm fine with that too. I don't know if we have to have an council adopted policy on a $20,000 sub fund, but that's what I'm asking for.
Thank you, Mayor. I couldn't disagree more. For an additional 20,000 when the event programming total for last year was 690,000. If they needed an additional 20,000 to solve the deal for a promoter, it's there. What I'm saying is that, and I don't disagree with the city manager, we are committed to try to find some alternative programming to drive people downtown while the City Hall complex is being renovated. That's not the issue. The issue is, do you have to be hit over the head to realize that spending nearly $250,000 for such a low attendance is a good value proposition? I contend that it is not, and that we should be looking at a substitute, some kind of event. Maybe it's a major festival, something. I don't know what it is. I'd certainly like to hear from the events department what their thoughts are, because this, even if it's for 2 years, we're throwing money away, and I don't like to see that. So I am not in favor of salting the pot with an additional 20,000 when there's a $690,000 budget for event programming. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm with Councilmember Clark. I mean, I understand and we are. I know we're all in agreement that we need to do something to help downtown during this construction and the renovation. So I thought the Live at the Lot was a good idea. but the return on the investment is startling. And honestly, if you look at, I mean, the community events, Pokemon card, whatever the people were doing with their phone, I don't know what that was, brought more people downtown in one day than Live at the Lot brought in the whole month of November. I mean, clearly these events are not attracting people to come. So, I mean, you could attract that many people Valentine's Day and whatever the dog days and whatever I've seen the numbers that Hedgema has, I've seen their reports that they're attracting down here with very little investment. They're attracting more people. So I don't know if we need to decide this today. I wonder if we could just get a consensus to say, leave the $226,000 in there as a placeholder, bring it back to a workshop, and let's have a conversation, more robust conversation. Maybe by then, economic development staff can bring us some other ideas, maybe some sort of 4th of July festival, something. But I mean, I'm not willing to spend another $226 million or $226,000 and get these same results. That's at least where I'm at. So I don't know if we want to, belabor the subject any further. I think that, at least for me, I'd like to have us have a robust conversation just on this topic and figure out how we can better spend this money. Maybe we do fewer Live at the Lots and some other community. You could get 70 people to come down here for a dance recital that would cost us very little money, not have to hire an act for that many people. So I think we need to take a better look at this and have a more broad discussion just on this topic. Thank you.
Mr. Turner.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Having attended many of these Live at the Lot programs, it is my opinion, and having done some work over years in this entertainment and type activity, it's my opinion the problem isn't the location, the problem isn't, primarily the problem is promotion. I mean, February shows that with some promotion, and this was even, I don't know how much it was even coordinated promotion, but with some promotion, we can make successful events down there. And why are that? I know that others aren't getting promoted to the degree that it takes to get the turnout. I look for things to do myself in the valley, and I too often don't see these types of things that we're doing. We don't need to get rid of the Live at the Lot series. It's a transition from the old amphitheater to the new amphitheater, and I think we need to keep it in place. What we do need to do something about the promotion side of it, and this has been, so I've presented this suggestion, and or for other events. I mean, I'm reasonably happy with, things like the Folk and Heritage Festival, but I think that could be significantly improved. All of these events, and they're around the city, I think could be significantly improved with better promotion. And if we don't have it internally, then let's have some money so we can work with those who are going to do their own promotion, because they have a vested desire to do it, but let's make it a little easier for them by knocking off some of the cost that it's easier for the city to bear. That's what I'm asking.
Thank you, Mayor. On this topic regarding the downtown events, I guess the questions I have are, do we have promoters that are contacting us that we are saying, oh, we can't help you because we don't have it in our budget? Has that happened in the last 12 months?
Mayor, Councilmember Melnar, the questions that we receive from promoters who are putting in a special event application generally are not those questions. We're usually getting that before someone puts in an application, so it's somebody who has an idea. So if somebody has an event idea and they come to our live event, for instance, and they see that we have a stage and that we have porta potties, that we have turf that rolls out, and you've seen the costs to do that, the ask is generally, why can't the city just provide that to us on the day we want to have our event? And so those are generally the questions we get. Those aren't usually coming from anybody that's provided an actual special event application. More often than not, at the stage that somebody's putting in an application, there's generally not an ask of our team to be providing those resources, because they know those are part of putting on an event.
And to follow up, if I may, Mayor, So are those events typically a paid-for event? I mean, when a promoter comes in to put on an event, typically a promoter is trying to make some money. So they're going to be charging somehow. So we're talking about, going along with our city manager mentioned, if we have someone come in who wants to put on an event, but they plan to, I mean, doesn't an event, a person that is doing events, isn't that their intent? Is there a for-profit organization? So when we say that there's all these people out there that are coming in that want to do an event, they are for profit, I would guess. Is that accurate or not accurate?
Mayor, Councilmember Malner, there's varying elements to that. So for instance, this last Sunday, we had our live concert on Saturday night. Sunday morning in that lot, an event promoter put on a car show. That car show had sponsorships, and it was a free event to the public. So they actually provided their own porta potties. Ours were still on site, but they also used their own porta potty provider, and they put on an event utilizing sponsorships, and it was specifically for fentanyl awareness. So that was their cause for the event they happened to be putting on, and everybody that was involved in that event helped make that event successful for that car show. So we see that happen. I think some of council went to the Asian American Festival, cultural festival that happened on the lot. That was an event that was open and free to the public. The producers of that event did get sponsorships to put on that event as well. They also have their own model of they charge vendors, for instance, to be a part of their event. And so there's lots of different elements to putting on an event that an event producer doesn't necessarily need to make money if it's not a ticketed event that way. They have other mechanisms for doing that. Sponsorships are a big way that events are put on to the public.
Okay, thank you for that information. So, I mean, I would be very much in favor of the city participating as a event sponsor when those kinds of events come to town, and I would hope that we are accepting those, that when we have an event that wants to do something, that we are absorbing that. Again, with your budget, I think I'd agree that you can absorb that. I think you need to make sure that that is an option in your budget, as Councilmember Turner suggested. But I believe you have the budget to do that. And given that, I think for events where they are a sponsored event that can be free for the public, I would be all in favor of us having more of those in downtown that provide more economic development for the downtown area. Thank you.
Mayor, Councilmember Moreno, just to acknowledge, we certainly have, as a department, done that to help those events from a sponsorship standpoint. Something that I think is really important for us also to understand very specifically here in downtown Glendale, there is an ordinance that was passed by the city council that allows us to waive community development fees that are associated with events up to $25,000. So that is in our city code, so long as that event is free and open to the public. So any event that you're seeing take place in downtown that is free and open to the public, we have been doing that. So the car show that took place on Sunday, the festival that I just mentioned, the Asian Cultural Festival, those events all received that same fee waiver, and that was another way that we were able to assist those events, and it is an incentive in downtown that we do allow anybody to use based on that city code, and we do promote that as well to our promoters.
Mayor, members of council, so there was a suggestion about maybe bringing this back to a workshop, and kind of reflecting on that, I think what I would recommend is, one, we've heard kind of the direction of the council in terms of being more proactive in encouraging outside promoters to come in, so we can certainly start looking internally at what we can do with that. My recommendation then would be to come back perhaps right after the break and have a specific workshop on this, because really as we get into the FY 24-25 budget, we'll be developing the FY 25-26 budget 6 months from there. And we should be into the new amphitheater. So I think it allows us to talk about what do we do in the upcoming budget year, and then also start having that discussion about how do we want to set ourselves up for once we have this kind of turnkey amphitheater project ready to go early 26. That'll be part of our next budget cycle development. So I think that would be my recommendation is I think we will work internally on what we can do to make sure that outside promoters, we can be an encourager to help cover some of the costs that are appropriate. Meanwhile, we'll put together some energy in putting together a workshop, and then we'll come back to the council, and then the workshop would really have two elements. What do we do for the kind of temporary event season as we complete the DCRP? And then a year and a half from now, what do we want to be pivoting to as a strategy starting in 26? So that would be my recommendation to the mayor and council.
Thank you. I actually agree with you. I also agree with Councilmember Tomachoff. So I think the one thing I'd really like to be focused on is when we come back in a workshop is not necessarily but who, but why. What do we want to accomplish with these events? Because we're sort of our own worst enemy in one sense, that we're competing with Westgate, and yet we're always helping promote Westgate. I think there's huge opportunities here. I like the fact if we can take some time, really figure out exactly what we want to do and why we want to do it. We're working with strictly nonprofit, if we're working for profit, and then how does that help downtown? I mean, if we're bringing in 35 food trucks and everybody's eating out of the food trucks and they're not using any of the brick and mortar people that are here at 365, I don't see how that's helping our downtown. So I'd like more conversation. I do like the idea of bringing this back at a workshop, really getting into it.
Mayor, members of the council, well, you hit on something that I've been, kind of thinking about since my arrival here in 2016, is we probably should start this workshop is even though we've been doing this for decades, with the why. Because I'm not sure it's crystal clear to me the why. So for example, if the number one reason was to provide an event for the community to go to, we could do a heavy metal weekend concert that would bring in lots of people from the community and meet that goal, and it may be the absolute worst thing for our downtown merchants. So probably when we come back as a workshop, we really need to wrap around the why component of this, and then I think it'll be much easier to lay out the programming to support that. And there could be more than one why, but at this point, this whole notion about the food trucks. If you recall, when we made changes to the Glendale Glitter, when we went from the bouncy toys and all the food vendors, what we heard from the merchants, even though they had a lot of concern about kind of the scaled down glitter version, was the restaurants did quite well, and those numbers tracked well for that season. And so the why was, well, let's make these changes to glitter so that we can improve our restaurant, food and beverage operations and retail merchants. So that's what I would suggest. We'll probably start off the workshop with a clear understanding of why. What does success look like? So, so we say if we have a successful event season, what does it look like? Are we going to measure sales tax revenue, or are we going to say sales tax revenue doesn't really matter, but we just want to bring physical bodies in? I don't know what the right answer is, but you can see where I'm going with this. We'll have that discussion, and I think it should be something we just carve out the day and we really get an opportunity for the council to share kind of the vision for our special events.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I was going to make the point, but the manager did. There's not a why. There's several whys. There's a lot of whys. And then to the mayor's point, the return on investment does not necessarily occur on the same date the event happens. Bringing people to our downtown, and I'm not just talking about downtown special events, I'm talking about special events in general. Bringing people to our downtown where they get to see our downtown, they come back down the road, and we should be doing more to bring them back down the road. It still surprises me how many people in this market area have never been to downtown Glendale. So when we do events that bring them here and they come back later, and that's when the return happens, or they have word of mouth about what a good time or how quaint or what, that they'd like to, that's all part of it. And that's just in one zone of why. But the cultural aspect and the entertainment aspect and what we provide for our residents, particularly on the smaller scale where it really is our residents more than likely that we're providing it for. That's just right there's 2 or 3 more whys, and there's plenty of them. So I don't mind exploring it. I don't know if there's support for my concept. It just doesn't seem smart to me that we go ahead and continue having programs that have very good substance, good bands, great stage, nice atmosphere, but maybe the wrong time of day, and there's no feedback coming for that a promoter would provide, or just having events that simply are failures because they're not well publicized or well promoted, because for some reason we don't seem to be able to do that internally. And I mean, it was mentioned we had a car show, open to the public yesterday, but I'll venture to guess very few of us even knew about it, and I'm even fewer residents out there. We don't solve the problem by throwing it away. We solve the problem by coming up with some ways in which it can be fixed. I'm proposing one, but if you want to either shoot it down today or save it for later, go ahead.
Mayor, just to kind of follow up and recap, just so we understand. So it sounds like we have a consensus to move some funding forward for the crime lab. And so we'll work with engineering. I think that's going to be actually somewhere between $1 million to $4 million, but we'll nail down that number, get it to you, and then you'll see that in tentative. And it's a shift. It won't change the overall budget. It'll just shift some of the, I believe, 15 million and 26 forward is what we're hearing from the council. And then in terms of the second discussion about special events, that will be sort of on hold until we have a workshop sometime in the fall. And then I did want to clarify something that Miss Lindsay said. I think it's just important to understand that if there was a huge opportunity that came along for special events and council wanted to move forward with something, and Miss Peterson didn't have it in her budget, then we'd talk to you at the time about how we could fund that. We are always we've got contingency, we've got other ways to find some funding if just this great opportunity came along in the meantime. So I'm sure Mr. Phelps will be able to, identify that this is a great opportunity, bring it back to you at that time.
To be clear, so we would not need that placeholder that Councilmember Tomachoff was talking about?
For the crime lab, we do. For the special events at this time, I don't think we need that. That would be my recommendation, is just to wait, and then if we have a great opportunity, we'll look at it at the time.
Who?
Turner had asked for the placeholder for special events. I asked for the placeholder for the crime lab. And Mayor, if I could, since you accidentally called on me, where are we leaving the Western Area Fire Station? Are we gonna leave no money in fiscal year 2025? I just want to be clear about that's separate from the 75th Avenue or 59th Avenue in Cactus or 75th Avenue in Orangewood. And I know that the consultant is in the process and working with staff. I've identified the location, but once that location's identified, there's $0 in fiscal year 2025 to move forward with anything.
Mayor, Councilmember Tomachoff, looking at the public safety CIP, there's funding in FY 26 and 27 for the airport area fire station. If you want us to move design money into FY 25, we can certainly do that.
I would like to see that, if there's a consensus for that.
Yeah, there's consensus for that.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Are we good?
I believe so, Mayor.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the next slide.
So let me throw one more thing. In the future, let's not get two things going at the same time. Let's just do one thing at a time. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. So the next slide, we kind of just want to again reaffirm kind of the budget highlights that that's being moved forward. And again, I want to, some of the stuff I know you know, but I think it's important to reemphasize some of this information. First, we continue really a culture here in the city of Glendale of starting with our forecasting. And if you go back, I can't speak to the years before my arrival, but what I can say that in the last 8 years, the adopted budget by the council has had a conservative revenue forecast with a conservative expenditure forecast. And this budget continues that. We have not missed in our 8 years of exceeding our revenue, and we've not missed coming in under on the expenditures. But we think that's still a good foundational element to how we approach budgeting, and this budget continues that. As for the last number of years, there is no property tax rate increase. So we're creating a continued flat levy rate for the city of Glendale. And so I asked staff to kind of put that down in terms of a number that I could put my arms around. And since 2016, we've decreased our levy rate for the city levy rate to our property owners by 27.5% over the last 8 years. And that's a real number decrease, even though we've had substantial inflation. That is a real number. And again, this budget continues that trend. More importantly, we've tried to align the budget around council priorities. So again, reflecting on when I first came here and helped put the first budget together, the council has been very unanimous in making sure that we increase our allocation of resources to things like park maintenance. This budget does that. If you look at this, the majority of our new FTEs, not all, but the majority, are aligned around our maintenance of our parks, our public safety, and improvements to our city infrastructure. And those have all been three priorities that this council and prior councils have really stated as important when we go to adopt the budget. This one continues to do that. The other thing that the council has really been focused on is our recruitment and retention of employees. This is a real issue, not only for government, but it's a real issue in the private sector. And so this particular budget, again, we've aligned and made our request for the increases to our compensation and to our comp and class studies and our MOUs so that we can continue to improve on our retention percentages and we continue to recruit the best and the brightest to come to work for the city of Glendale. And so in there was the recommendation of the 3.5% cost of living COLA and another up to 3.5% for merit. So what we've done is we say we want to be competitive. Our COLA, we believe, puts us in that area. And then again, reflecting back on a council direction, this council has said we want to incentivize our employees to push for better performance. And so then we have in this budget 3.5% that can be up to 3.5% that an employee can gain by exceptional performance. So those are all reflected in here as well as our implementation and classification and compensation study. So with that, I think we're going to walk you then through some summary that we have currently. Thank you.
Our next slide is the fiscal year 24-25 proposed operating budget by fund. The total of the fiscal year 24-25 proposed budget is $671.4 million. 48% of that is the general fund at $321.2, followed by the enterprise funds at $144.2 million, the internal service funds at $116.9 million, the special revenue funds at $77.7 million, and the vehicle replacement fund at $11.4 million.
Mayor? Thank you. Would it be fair to say of that 48% general fund budget, the majority of that goes toward public safety?
Mayor, members of the council, I will cover that on the next slide.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. So our next slide, as Councilmember Clark alluded to, is the general fund operating budget by function. Police services make up $135.1 million, or 42% of the general fund budget, followed by fire services at $71.3 million, or 22%. So 64% of the general fund budget is public safety, followed by parks and recreation, public works, community services, and non-departmental. The total for the fiscal year 24-25 general fund operating budget is $321.2 million. The fiscal year 24-25 capital improvement plan is $566.7 million. The largest portion of that is facility maintenance at $131.2 million, followed by streets at $114.5 million, parking at $72.2 million, and public safety at $71.7 million.
Mayor?
Go ahead.
I'm not sure where the appropriate time would be to bring this up, and maybe I should have brought it up when we were discussing the add-ins for capital improvement. But there was an item that has been an ongoing discussion with Parks, city manager, myself, and the Paseo Racket Club for the last couple of years regarding making some improvements at the Paseo Racket Club. What I'd like to ask council is, for consensus, is to put into the budget a line item to study what is really needed there at the racquetball club, and then perhaps put a hold in a future budget for some improvements. One improvement would be, we've talked about adding the possibility of adding pickleball courts. We wanted to discuss that feasibility. We've looked at the property several times. We've had some estimates from Parks that it was presented to me, but we've never actually put it into our a line item yet. And so I'd like to ask council if they would put that in a line item to determine the feasibility of doing that for this fiscal year, and including looking at our current tennis courts there that we have. As I've also received some word that there are some capital improvement possibility needs there. So I'd like to have that studied and put it actually in a line item, or be absorbed somehow in the budget, so that we can determine what we can and cannot do there, and move forward with that with a possible line item at a future budget that actually identifies it as a project for the future.
Vice Mayor, members of the council, I'm going to ask John Kennedy to come forward and sort of address that question, but I do believe it's already being studied, and he may have a better idea of where that funding is coming from and what the plan is.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor, council members, Councilmember Malinar, yes, we are doing an internal land study that we just currently recently kicked off to look to see what physically could be changed or added on the footprint, within the footprint of the tennis center and the racket center, to look at potential opportunities there. So we are doing that land study currently within our operating budget. It might take a few more weeks before that study is done, but there is, and I couldn't find it real quickly what future year, but there is a Paseo Park improvement CIP project. I just don't know the number or the year off the top of my head. We could get back to you with that.
Okay. Will this land study include cost estimates and what I mean, obviously it'll tell us what you can fit there. Will it also include estimates for cost? Because that's where I was asking for the additional money possibly, is that's going to require us to do some in-depth study with contractors to come in and put in some proposals as to what that would cost.
Vice Mayor, Councilmember Malinar, currently this study will give us more of a feasibility of what we could do. It won't have a full-blown cost estimate. There could be some general, large picture estimate items, but not detailed budget items for sure. That would require an additional, deep dive to come up with those specific costs.
And that's what I'm kind of looking for, similar to like what we did with the crime lab. It's a much smaller project, I would guess, but I would like to get some finite numbers. We've been doing this for 2 years now, and we've had numbers thrown out that were estimates, and we didn't know if they were realistic. And so I want to stop that cycle of just throwing out and then delaying the project continually. I want to see some actual numbers. I want to see whether what we could bring back to the council and say, this is what the project will cost, and move forward for that. Some of it we may be absorbed. It may be a small cost. But I would like to make sure that we have in the budget a line item that identifies that, so that we can move it forward, and there's no question as to what we're going to get for a discussion at a later time.
Mayor, members of the council, so I did find the project that Mr. Kennedy is referring to. It's CIPPK 23026. It has $1.515 million in fiscal year 28. We can do similar to what I said earlier about the evidence lab. We can work with engineering and see what it would take again, as John is saying, we first need to determine what can we do there, what fits there, what could be done, what are some options, and then once we determine that, we'd have to bring that back to council to see, well, what of these things that could be done or can't be done, possibly, what direction do you want to go? And then we'd be able to say, okay, now that we have some direction in what, can be done and what you want to do, we have to go back and see what is the cost of doing that. So we could potentially look for some funding for that. The issue specifically for parks is we are out of, or very nearly out of GO bond authority. So as staff, to move this forward and put that, we'll have to look for a funding source for that. So we'll have to work with engineering to determine, okay, what kind of a placeholder do we need? And then I have to work with budget and finance to come up with a funding source for that. My gut tells me that would be general fund balance at this point, because that's probably the only source that we have. We may have some park diff. I don't know. I haven't looked at that. So we'll work with engineering, look at that, and then we'll get back to you and bring something forward at the tentative budget adoption, or we'll send it to you with some information ahead of time so you know, but we'd have to make that change for tentative budget.
All right, thank you.
Mayor, assuming we have consensus from council to do that, which it seems like we do. Okay, thank you.
That brings us to the general fund 5-year financial forecast. The estimated beginning fund balance for fiscal year 25 is $267.8 million. Ongoing operating revenue of $414.2, operating expenditures at $314.2 million, one-time expenditures of $5.2 million, net transfers of $106.4 million, contingency for fiscal year 25 at $5 million, with a total surplus or deficit of $16.7 million, which leaves us with an ending fund balance of $251.1 million. Of that, we also have two items that we have listed for assigned fund balance. We have $16 million assigned for capital improvement projects, and we have $20 million assigned for the pension reserve, which leaves us with a total assigned fund balance of $36 million, unassigned fund balance of $215 million. And as council approved a new financial policy for general fund balance this past year, it's 25% of ongoing expenditures. So the fund balance policy for fiscal year 25 is $78.6 million.
Mayor? Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to point out, with the change in policy from 25% of ongoing revenue to 25% of ongoing expenditures, it decreased the our fund balance policy, minimum fund balance policy, which would have been by about $25 million this year. So I just wanted to make that point. So, keeping in mind that, what if in a fragile economy and in a very, scary world that we're living in right now, it costs about our operating budget is about $1 million a day, somewhere in that neighborhood. So, just wanted to make sure that I at least put that out there, that we did decrease by our mandatory, self-imposed mandatory fund balance of about $25 million with that change in policy. Thank you, Mayor.
And with that brings us to the end of the presentation of fiscal year 24-25 total budget appropriation of $1.48 billion. 671.4 of that is operating, $566.7 million of that is capital. We have $140.5 million for contingency, and our debt service for fiscal year 25 is $106.2 million.
Thank you. So for the 10 years I've been on council, we've been utilizing these pie charts, and they have gotten better over the years, and I appreciate that. They're a little easier to follow and all, but they're just a snapshot of 1 year at a time, and I would like to request our Budget and Finance Department to provide us with some graphs that will show the changes over time, looking back, say, 10 years. How have the different aspects of our budget grown or shrunk, both for revenues and expenditures? you know, like a line graph that shows here's where it was for the 10 years back in these different departments. We already have the numbers. The numbers are there, so it's just a graphing function. But I think that'll provide the council and the community a better vision of the trend lines we have and easier to see the changes over time that we're dealing with. Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you.
So for our final slide, we have tentative budget adoption at the voting meeting on May 14th.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
You good?
Yep, we're done.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Motion to go into executive session?
So move.
Second.
Have a
Second.
motion, Councilmember Turner, a second from Councilmember Chamatop, I think. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, vote aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Council meeting is recessed for executive session.
See what happens what?